Hello, I'm Duncan Weldon. I'm a journalist at the Economist magazine. And firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to you all for coming along this evening. I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion. And I also want to say a big thank you to Luminati for sponsoring tonight's discussion. To anyone that looked on the website and was looking at the photographs on the website, I really am Duncan Weldon. When I worked at Newsnight, beards were very much not allowed on television, but my mother still prefers that headshot of me. And so just to make her happy, I've been using it, although it's now somewhat out of date. I'm an economist. I write about economics for The Economist. So I'm always quite interested in sort of the economic angle, as you can imagine, to these things. I think what we're talking about tonight with this open source data collection has quite a strong economic angle. We know that open data, transparency, drives competition, it drives pricing, and should lead to good consumer outcomes. And I think it's fair to say that Luminati are not a company I'd heard a great deal about a couple of months ago. I think it's a company I'm going to be hearing a lot more about in the future. And I think it's a company, although I wasn't aware of them, is already affecting markets that I use regularly, whether that's online digital ads, whether that's online e-commerce, whether it's particularly things like travel booking and travel websites. So it's a company which is already having a real impact day to day on my life without me being aware of it. But tonight we're going to talk through some of the issues. The four panelists are at the back there. I'm going to call them down one by one, which suddenly feels a bit like a game show host thing to do. So moving through my notes. So first on our panel, can I invite down Mark Joseph, the chairman of Luminati? Thank you, Mark. Secondly, we have Jeni Tennison from the Open Data Institute. Then Steve King from Black Swan. And tonight's cybersecurity expert is Menny Barzilay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just, like I say, I want to move into a discussion. I want to get the audience involved quite early. But just, as you're kindly sponsoring tonight, Mark, maybe for people that aren't aware, you could give us the 3-4 minute elevator pitch on who Luminati are and what they do.
Thank you. Mark Joseph, the chairman of Luminati. We think we're probably the largest company in this open source data collection area, serving household names as they go onto the web and collect public data. And I do want to make that distinction. This isn't private data that's subject to so much regulation. This is public data, prices, for example, up on third-party websites. And it's an area that isn't regulated today, and we're very keen to see the ethical development of this sector, and we'd be keen to see regulation, and we impose some of that on ourselves. So when you think about what Luminati does, it's helping 10,000 clients collect very large data sets all around the world. And as we all know, data's very valuable, but it's increasingly difficult for companies to see things on the web. There's all sorts of blocking and anti-bot technology that's taking transparency away from the internet, and Luminati's trying to bring it back.
Cool, thank you so much. So I like the example of Luminati as the mystery shopper, as it used to be the case back in the days when retailers actually had physical buildings with bricks and glass and windows. That various chains would send around mystery shoppers to check the prices at their rivals. But what we're seeing now is companies are basically putting blinders down, stopping people when they suspect it's a competitor from going out there and checking prices. And I can see how that's got a potentially negative impact on competition and consumer outcomes. But that's the bright side of the upside, the positive use of e-proxy networks. But I think it's worth saying the technology behind this could be put to some nefarious purposes, could it not?
Yes, so the tools used for open source data collection can be used for nefarious purposes, as you say. An obvious example would be overwhelming a website by going to collect data at such a rate that no one else can then get onto that.
That's
website.
less mystery shopper and more flash mob.
Yes, or even DDoS attack.
Yeah.
One of the things that it's necessary to do is to know what these customers are doing with these tools to make sure that they're not using them for a DDoS attack, for example, or for sending spam email. Perhaps they're creating fake likes. This world of data is moving so quickly that the regulation takes a long time to catch up. And what we're hoping in this event is to really shine a light on the topic and open up the debate.
Fantastic. I'm just going to bring in the rest of the panel at this point. Can we start from the cyber security point of view? I mean, what are your initial reactions?
So I think, there are, open source data collection is very important part of cybersecurity. A major part of what cybersecurity tools are doing is that they're taking data, they're collecting data, and they're transforming it into security. For example, if you want to see if someone doing some kind of ad fraud, which is a very big problem today, billions of dollars in loss, one way, or one of the only ways that you can do that is that you want to see those ads from the eyes of the users. You want to see how they see those ads. And you cannot do that by traditional means, because this is very important to remember that this is the first time in history where crime is being led by the smartest people in the world. So those are smart and creative people. Those people could have worked for Facebook and Amazon. And for many different reasons, they are becoming criminals. And if you want to deal with those kind of people, you have to be very innovative and very smart. And one of the things that they are doing is that they're checking if the thing that looks at the ad is a person or a machine. So if you're using traditional systems that check your ads, you will not see anything. That will not help. So one of the main ways to deal with those kind of threats, and there are many of those examples, is to do major open source data collection. Without that, it's very hard to achieve security.
And it sounds almost like we have almost an arms race, a cat and mouse game between companies don't want their competitors to be able to collect open source data from their own website, but do want to be able to look at their competitors' pricing, for example. So how is this sort of playing out to anyone on the...
Well, it depends on the reason that they're not want people to collect information. If what they're trying to do is to protect their users, it's great, right? Some of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure that nobody's collecting information that might hinder your users. But in some places, I think that protecting your data from people using it is an ethical thing to do, because it hurts competition, and it hinders innovation. And so it's very important to understand why companies don't want people to do that. In some cases, this is very good. In other cases, this is very bad.
I see you're nodding along there, Jeni.
So I think that some of the examples, so in particular around pricing, where we can see that having better access to price data probably makes the market work better, is a really nice example of where those kind of, we want to have better data flows in order to make the market work better. I think that the thing that is the kind of attitude that I would come at that problem from is to say, well, in that case, shouldn't those organisations, shouldn't those companies be making that data openly available and explicitly licensing it as being open and allowing other people to explicitly to use it? And shouldn't government be stepping in, if we're going to have some regulation, to actually encourage supermarkets, to encourage retailers to have that more open attitude about the data that they hold, and that by being more openly available, everybody would benefit from. So when I see kind of, in many ways, like the use of these kinds of technologies for getting access to that information, to me is a powerful signal that the market needs that information in order to function well, and therefore there should be some action to make that happen in a much more kind of above board way, right? Much more open way than as you described it, Duncan, this kind of cat and mouse between ever increasing protections around websites, either technological or legal, and ever increasing intelligent kind of scraping technologies or ways of getting around the kinds of technical protections that are being put in place. And it's kind of frustrating for me that instead of putting all of that effort and money into that cat and mouse game, we're not putting that effort and money into some good openness and standardization that would make it all work a bit more smoothly.
I couldn't agree more. So from Black Swan, we probably buy and license more open source data by volume than anyone else in the world. We listen to millions and millions of people's tweets and social messages in order to project what they're going to be doing in the future. So we license that, and a lot of the brands who work with big brands like PepsiCo, Google, McDonald's, they want to know that we've licensed that and got that right. They understand we're using open data. They understand that that's a really important context to what's going on in the human life. And they want to license it, But yeah, you're right. Half of our problem really is making sure we have the right communication with those data sources to make sure we've done the right things license-wise. We're not scared of paying, but that structure has to be there. Otherwise, people will just scrape it.
So why do you think companies are reluctant to make this sort of data open source?
Potentially because they are at the same time trying to stop other people see their data. So when we think about pricing, for example, we know that it's increasingly difficult for even competition authorities to look at the market and see prices now. We've all been served up captures when we've gone to a website they've identified you're potentially a competitor or a bot, and therefore checking that you're human before you can proceed. So I think the more companies are blocking people from seeing their data, they talk less and less about how they collect data.
And just for people that aren't aware, could you give us just an example of how your company actually goes about collecting this data?
Well, our clients collect the data, and we provide tools to help them do that. And it's a variety of technology and a use of IP addresses and so on. And it's really from the experience that we build up from seeing all the defenses that companies put up that we're able to help bring transparency back to the web and show people what consumers see. Because when you have a website, I think in the old days everyone saw the same, but now we're all aware everyone's seeing something different. So one example is by geography, big pricing variations based on where you are. And without tools like Luminati's, you can't see those pricing variations, and you can't see what consumers see.
And that's the important thing, isn't it? This is about information that consumers could see. Yeah. This isn't about private individuals' data or any of that. This is all
exactly the publicly available data, and yet it's not open to companies.
Yeah. And it certainly was fascinating to me to realise the extent to which, what I've always thought of as just publicly available information can be very hard to see depending on where you are in the world. And it was through this that I learned that one should never book flights using a Mac. As apparently there are websites that will say Mac user has a bit more money. Let's just 20%. Bump it up a bit.
Yeah.
So I've certainly improved my own financial position already this evening. Can I just ask at this point if anyone in the audience wants to come in with any questions, any comments? No? Is that a?
Yes,
Sorry.
there's a hand.
Oh, fantastic. Can we go that? I've got the glare of studio lights in my eye at this angle.
Hi, thank you. My name is Poppy. I'm CEO at Darktrace. Well, my questions is, a lot of what the panel's been sharing is how you consume data that is publicly available. What's your thought about how representative that data is of the true answer? Because obviously, or sometimes the perception is that the noisiest data is not always the most representative data.
It's interesting. Is there any more? Or? Nope. Fantastic. Shall Should we let's do this traditional way? I want you to do in a panel discussion and go from one end to the other.
So let's maybe go from the other. I'm not sure I understood the question.
Can I?
Oh, go.
Yeah.
To be honest,
Actually, this is, and I'll answer this just because this is the number one question our customers ask us a Black Swan. So a Black Swan, what we're doing is listening to people's opinions on what they buy, what they're having for lunch, and what they're willing to pay for something. So we can project forward and say in the future, these are the kind of products we make. So our clients will say to us, hang on a minute, you're listening to Twitter. Isn't that a bunch of 20, 30, no, 40 somethings opinions who are very vocal and not necessarily represent sample? And the answer is yes, but that's one data source. And interestingly, Twitter as a data source is an early trend data source. So if you're trying to predict the future, it's a great data source. Yes, it's not completely, it's biased to that, but that's a good bias because it tells you where things are going. We would look then at someone like Reddit, which is a completely different data set, generally older people, much more deeper conversation, bit more angry. And that will give us another view on the segment, of the market segment. And so we understand where people are having these conversations. We know that we don't get 80-year-olds because they generally don't use Twitter or any other network, but that's usually enough for us to create a patchwork quilt and understand the segments of where we're getting this information from.
Did you want to come out? No, fine.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I was going to ask, abuse my chair's privilege to ask a question myself. So this is a very new area of the world. This technology is advancing very rapidly. It feels like there probably isn't much actually regulation out there. I don't even know who the lead regulator would be in certain jurisdictions. So what sort of challenges does that present?
If you take, for example, ticket touting. So with data collection tools on the large scale that we're talking about, it would be possible for an individual to go and buy concert tickets and frankly buy every concert ticket available, and that used to happen. So the venues are more sophisticated in that they'll limit how many tickets are sold to each individual, but still using data collection tools, you could buy every ticket at the concert and then try and sell them at a premium afterwards. So, for example, Luminati self-imposes, in the absence of law and regulation in every country worldwide, a ban on customers from going to ticketing sites. They can see the price, but they can't buy the tickets. So who would be the regulator on a worldwide basis? I think that's very challenging, but I think national governments are coming round to these topics. I mentioned another one earlier, which is creating fake likes, for example. Those conversations are beginning in the US, but just a year ago, absolutely no discussion of regulation or law to stop that type of thing. So I think it's like all fast-moving areas and new technologies, it has good sides and bad sides, and it takes debate and open thought to think about how the industry should be regulated.
But you've almost taken a sort of a self-denying ordinance on a lot of this, haven't you? There's a lot of, you'll know your customer procedures, obviously an important part of the business. So when you first got attracted towards the company, how important was that to you? This sense that this isn't just an interesting technology, but it's being managed in a, for want of a better phrase, a careful way.
That was very important because these data collection networks can also be used for nefarious purposes. The fact that Luminati has a know your customer procedure, like a bank before it would bring a customer on, they need to know who that is and what it is they're doing, was very important. And we'd like to see more of that in the industry. And I suppose we're surprised that large companies use data collection techniques where there isn't the compliance and regulation in place.
Jenny, do you have some concerns around the regulation in this area? Just generally, sort of stepping back from open source data and data collection, the regulatory framework is still quite patchy.
Yeah, so I think that there's So the bit that is the biggest kind of grey area for me around this is the rights that organisations have when they put stuff on the web over their copyrighted content and over their database content that they expose through the web. And there is. People have and retain copyright. They have and retain database rights over that kind of information. They put technological controls over what can be done in terms of reuse of that information. They put legal controls over what can be done in terms of reuse of that information. So stuff that is on the web, publicly available, is not openly licensed in the vast majority of cases, exceptions being things like government websites where there are good, strong open licensing around them. And the problem is that leads us into this really weird kind of grey area around the reuse of information that is being made available on the web. And I would love to see that grey area being a bit more white and black, right? So for me, then, the bits that it would be useful to have some more regulation and clarity around are about when reuse of information that has been scraped off websites is legitimate and when it isn't legitimate. And there's a whole patchwork of kind of case law. There's quite a lot of stuff kind of in the US. There's as far as I'm aware, not as much in a kind of UK and EU setting, particularly where there are these database rights which might alter the way in which that's seen. And it would just be good to have a bit more clarity over kind of what's permissible and what isn't permissible. Also a bit more enforcement around it and a bit more kind of, I think, when some of this is happening kind of behind the scenes, then we can't have a proper adult conversation about actually this is a good thing to have happen or this is a bad thing to have happen. Which bits look good and which bits don't. So it's really, it's actually quite refreshing to be able to have a proper conversation about about using scraping in order to get hold of this information in a context where, some of it might be, as you say, a little bit dodgy.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting point. I think I want to start by saying that it took me a while to understand that what you said to me is like completely terrible in the sense that
I apologize.
No, it's not. No, you didn't say that in a bad way. In the sense that the fact that you learn about the algorithm of the way flights goes, you're not going to use your Mac in order to book flights. This is to me terrible. This is exactly the type of damage that trying to prevent people from accessing data creates. And I hate the fact that companies take advantage of the fact that I don't have access to data in order to leverage their ability to take more money from my pocket. And the fact that you're not going to use your computer to do that, also your mobile phone, don't use mobile phones, is the same effect. You should use a PC, Windows 95, no antivirus, and give me your IP address. But generally speaking, this is a big problem. Consumers are changing the way they're using tools because companies are hiding data. And on that I want to build and say, I think Luminati and industry leaders deserve a big compliment because it's very easy to become very greedy when dealing with data. The moment you have a system that transforms data into money, it's very easy to say, let's take more data and let's be very, very greedy, and we see that. But you said two things, and I think that was two very important things, and Luminati definitely deserve compliments for those. Number one, you say, we do not collect data, we give tools for other companies to do whatever they think is right. And number two, we self-regulate to make sure that our clients do not exploit this data, and the company itself has a very clear set of rules. And in the world where everything is gray and there is nobody saying this is true and this is right and this is wrong, the fact that you have such an ethical code, I think this is something more companies should learn from that.
Fantastic. And was there a comment? There's one at the back and there's one at the front as well. So we've got the one at the back first and then the gentleman at the front.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't sure.
Sorry.
A very interesting discussion, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm thinking about GDPR and a lot of regulation in that space. So I feel like we've been talking about open data when we're talking about data, but not personal data. And we all know that the beautiful world of when we do anonymize that data, it becomes data, we can do almost anything with it, with the caveats of ethical standards, etc. But how about actually using personal data? In the example of like Swan and listening into a feed, the fact that that personal data in those feeds and Twitter handles, for example, those are data, and the fact that they made them publicly available, what is the legal basis? I don't know whether you're the right person to ask for that, but what have you been relying on as a legal basis to do so? And have you also been challenged by regulators, because this is already a quite regulated field?
Sure. And I absolutely should be the right person in Black Swan to answer this question. If I'm not, then the company shouldn't be around. So it's a huge important point. So we. What Black Swan is specifically trying to do is predict the future by looking at trends. So its interest in people is marginal. You've got no free will. You do what you're going to do anyway. So our theses on individuals is very different. We're not interested in individuals as such. But that doesn't mean we don't collect individual data in order to build algorithms, which then go on to build the trends and the predictions. So I think a really good example we were talking about earlier, GDPR was brilliant because for the first time we had a really clear definition of what to do when someone unsubscribed from a blog or from Twitter. Because before, they would unsubscribe and they would sit in our database. And that was nothing else. We didn't know if that was good or bad. It just was what it was. What GDPR says now tells us clearly that we can no longer not only keep that person's data, but we can also no longer use the algorithms derivative of that person's data as well. So we now must be able to, in our huge database of billions of messages and people, be able to go all the way down, find all those messages of that person, pluck them out, and then reconfigure our future dependent on them not being there. That was a huge, painful undertaking, but one which for the first time was very clear, very direct, and we knew what we had to do about it. So I think that was a huge step forward and a terrifying moment for me when we realized we had to do it, and the technology and the expense to do it, but fantastically clear. So I can now look back and know we did everything we did. I think just to build on what you said around laws, our customers, the number one question is, are you a representative example? Yes, we are. The second question is, can you be sure that the data you're collecting, you're scraping, you're licensing is absolutely, done in the right way? Our customers would not work with us if they don't do that. So I've got a lot of, I think this will be fine if people put a lot of investment in the conversation and the structures, because our customers don't want to be later on down the line find out we scraped a Russian website and took something which we shouldn't, which meant that they now sell more cola. That's just not a good event for anyone to be in. So I think that early we're beginning to get comprehension of what things that GDPR are doing. It's a huge step forward, if not terrifying step. And I think country by country we're having to adapt our technology and our view depending on the government's view on how we should be dealing with their GDPR or their data.
Fantastic. We'll go to the question. We've two questions from a gentleman here, then the lady here. Just to say as well, when we talk about GDPR and individual data, I think it is a fascinating topic, although one I've heard discussed a fair amount. And what really interested me about this evening was this moving away from personal data to other types of data and data transparency. And just by the by, I chair a lot of events on the British economy and economics in general. And I was speaking to a colleague, one of our technology reporters this morning, and I said, I'm going to be chairing this event on data. And he said, GDPR. Think about how you think about Brexit and how long you can get through a discussion before it comes up. It will come up very quickly. Yeah. We made 40 minutes.
I'm afraid you've got two lawyers' questions in a row. It's Peter Finding from Fisher Boyles. And actually, I think part of my question has just been answered, but it'd be interesting to have some more thoughts. There's clearly a very big challenge in transnational regulation of data collection, whether it's private or open source data collection. What I wonder is whether it is really realistic to rely on consumers, whether they're business customers or retail consumers, to have the market self-regulate, or if we are going to need to have transnational regulation rather than pockets of patchwork regulation in more developed economies.
Who would like to go first on the...
But I'm more than happy to take that. I think we're going to need to have transatlantic. We have a lot of time and thought is having to give in different countries' laws and data. So you've got the website itself, as you were saying, what's the license? Are you happy for you to scrape your data? Are you happy with that? But also the country itself. So one of our customers wants to know what's going on in Russia. Well, Twitter isn't really in Russia. Actually, you can turn the Russian network off now. So it's completely different internet. They have completely different rules. We actually have to have servers in Russia, like processing Russia data so it can pass algorithmic results back in order to stick to the right laws. That's just madness, from an environmental, an expense and everything cost. That could be so much easier with proper structure, international structure on sort of data management and things like GDPR. I think it's a hugely welcome initiative.
Jenny, do you have any thoughts on the need for we spoke a bit about the UK and the EU, but is there a need for something more global here?
I'm sure that there is. I think that we'll only get there over time. If you look at the kinds of trade regulations that are being set up, so obviously in the EU, then there's the whole kind of single digital economy or whatever that it is that they call it. But there's also new trade agreement between Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile, I think, around digital economy as well, which also kind of highlights just basically countries are going to be coming together in order to interact with each other more easily around digital and data, and that will naturally lead us into, I think, a lot more harmonisation around data-related law, not just around personal data, but also around kind of IP type stuff. But it's going to take us a while to get there, and I think it's going to be an evolutionary kind of process rather than a top-down kind of process, in my gut.
Fantastic. Lady at the front.
Right, I have a question. So the previous speaker, I'm not going to talk about GDPR, even though I live and breathe it as a data privacy lawyer, but I love the ODI. I'm a huge fan. Just want to let you know. But hearing your responses, again, knowing what I know about the ODI, and then knowing, what this is about, and hearing the previous speaker say, open data and open source data collection, they are, in my understanding, not at all the same thing. And I'm just wondering if, for my benefit and for the benefit of the audience, you could explain the distinction between open data, which is what you're championing with your organization, versus open source data collection.
Yeah, and so for me, then the term open in the open source data collection as it's being used here is a complete misnomer, right? For me, then open source and open data are around code and data that has been explicitly licensed with what's called an open license, which is a very unrestricted license. It means that data can be accessed and used and shared by people. And there's a particular, obviously, open source definition for code, and there's an open definition for other kinds of content. And the vast majority of content and data that is on the web is not openly licensed. It's not explicitly made available for others to reuse. It has other kinds of restrictions and terms and conditions around it. So Twitter feeds are not open data, for example. But there are things that are, like government websites, which are made available under the Open Government License, openly licensed content. Okay.
So I've got a gentleman at the front, but first, Mark, do you want to say anything on that? Or?
No.
Fine.
Yeah, maybe I'll just. It's interesting. I don't know, trivia. Probably most people already know that. But so I spent 7 years in the military, in the intelligence services, and in the intelligence world, we do use some acronym like HUMINT, which is human intelligence, SIGINT, which is signal intelligence, and OSINT, which is open source intelligence. And in that sense, it is more similar to the concept of what we're talking here about collecting information from open sources like newspapers, TV channels, nothing that requires So just
Yeah.
there is an explanation why open source is the correct way to
Thank
use
you for
that.
explaining it.
Yeah.
Like I say, that it's very much from the kind of world that I come from, that open has that very, very specific.
Yeah, I totally agree that your probably terminology is more accurate to what we should have. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hiya, Jobin from Vodafone Group. I think my question is for Steve. So scraping social media sites, I guess one thing, when you work with brands, how do you make sure that you cover the negative side of social media? So, for example, Elon Musk's SUV demo wasn't that great, but I think he made a lot of money out of it, didn't he? Because the windscreen got broken. Oh, sorry, the side screen. So, how do you make sure that those sort of negative things happening in the social media site or anywhere you scrape is not then fed into the business and then business make a decision out of it, for example?
Yeah,
which is not really good.
There's a heavy answer I'll spare you for on this. I mean, the real answer is there's a hell of a lot of negative. We use that as well. So a lot of our customers are really looking for things they don't want to do as much as things they do want to do. So sentiment's quite a good tool for doing that. AI-wise, we use things around relevance, so to really understand the relevance of someone saying. So, in your world, orange, for example, we're talking about orange, the colour, orange, the network, or I've gone orange, or orange hair. We need to understand the context that someone's saying something in order to make that useful for a brand. So there's a bit of sentiment to know when something's a bit like someone's a bit annoyed compared to someone's really happy, but really it's about relevance. Is this thing the person is saying relevant to the question I'm asking?
Is anyone in the audience? Fantastic. Just a question to the whole panel, really. Why do you think companies are so reluctant to talk about using this sort of open source data collection, to take the intelligence service definition? Why do you think companies are? Because I mean, you can see the use. You can say to consumers, this is leading to price transparency. This is leading to better outcomes, more competition, more competitive markets. But companies still don't like to talk about it, do they?
I suppose in order to collect data, they can't go with their own IP address. So one supermarket looking at the prices in another one couldn't use their own IP address because they're blocked. So perhaps because they have to borrow another IP address, that makes them feel there's something covert about it, and maybe that's why it's not talked about widely. And as I mentioned earlier as well, the fact that the companies that collect the data are very often the ones putting up the barriers to stop people collecting their data. Yeah. So I think they don't want to be too open and public about it.
I mean, as always, have a view on anything database. And we use, your traditional open source database as well as licensed open conversation database for context. What company in the world wants to tell you how they came to their answer? Have we ever shared our data sources for how we got to our conclusion in any business context at all? So most of these algorithms you're building are more accurate because you've got, you're not going to say I used, the country GDPR numbers in order to get here, because then you're going to let everyone else copy your algorithm, which does your pricing. So I think everyone is kind of cool about using everything, but you're not going to give away your secrets of, what you're using.
I can see a lady on this table here, and at the front as well. I apologise if anyone on this side of the room is... Yes, I got one. Fantastic, thank you.
Hi. It's more of an observation, I think, than a question. But when you're talking about pricing, isn't the analogy, the mystery shopper is a perfect example. Back in the day, people used to go round the corner shops and check out their competitors' pricing and then go back and adjust their prices equivalently. But from screen scraping and all of the technology that's now available, isn't it the equivalent of somebody putting up a barrier at the front of the corner shop whilst hundreds of people go in and mark all of their prices in every destination in order to stop that person doing their job and selling the corner shop items? That to me is like a great analogy of actually the difference between mystery shopping and price transparency within the realms of checking your competitors' prices rather than going and scraping their websites that it actually pulls it down and doesn't do now what people want it to do, which is consumers going on and booking.
I want to add just to your story, I think there was a very important part of the story that you forgot to mention. So those stores, imagine that every person that enters the store gets different prices. So you go inside and say, oh, she looks like she has money, so this is the price for you. And then another person goes inside and then says, this person doesn't have enough money, so we will give them different prices.
But is the difference actually between, okay, so I'm going to go into a shop in centre of London to, you know, outside of Manchester, and that's the difference? Like, my rent is different in that scenario.
This part of what you're saying is totally true. I'm just adding to it the fact that for different people, the same apartment in the center of London or the same product in the center of London will be will have a different price due to data that you cannot control, that you don't know that you control. Right? They're trying to exploit the fact that you don't have like full transparency of the data and make you pay more or less if they think that this is how they can make you buy something.
I know that I'm going to go into Marks and Spencer's in the centre of London and I'm going to pay £3 for a sandwich that in, like Gatwick, not Gatwick, Crawley town centre is going to cost me £2.70.
That's true, but if both of us will go to Marks and Spencer, and I'll stand behind you online, and you will pay, I don't know, £2. And then when I'll go there, they will ask me for £4, and I'll ask why, and they say like, I don't know, I don't like the way you look like. I don't know. Like it seems like you have the ability to pay more. I will probably sue them, and I will win. But on the internet, it happens all the time.
I think there's another important point as well, because I didn't quite hear, but I think you were saying that the actual shoppers can't get into the shop because there's so many people with their clipboards writing the price down. So one of the things that Luminati does, for example, which isn't regulated but it should be, is limit the amount of traffic to any website to absolutely ensure that it doesn't impair the performance of the site. Because your example does happen online, absolutely, and websites get slowed. They even go offline as a result of data collection done by tools that don't have that restriction.
I'm aware we're coming towards the end. I can see there's a question across there, a question down here. What I'd like to do is take those two questions together. And are there any more? Was that one in the back there? Yeah, fine, because we got three. So we got one at the back, one here, and one here. And come and hassle the panel as dinner starts. Thank you so much.
Hi there, Ed Target from Computer Business Review. I have a question for Luminati, which is you've obviously built a very, very interesting and very powerful tool. I'm not sure explicitly how that works in terms of whether you bought a sort of large network of proxy servers or so on. What kind of diligence do you do on your customers in terms of making sure that that's not misused by people, for example, for ad fraud or something like that?
So this is the KYC, Know Your Customer procedure that I mentioned earlier on. A customer, before they get access to the network, is firstly identified, which for corporates or individuals might involve their passport, and then the business activity is checked and verified. And then as that customer is using the network, their usage of the network is monitored for any unusual behaviours or behaviours that don't follow the rules. And if anything was detected, then that customer is terminated. So we do take this very seriously. It's because other data collection tools like proxy networks are frequently used for sending spam email and DDoS attacks and the other examples we were giving, creating fake likes and so on. And without really active management by the data collection tool, those things will happen. People do want to do those things.
Fantastic. We have the second question. No? Oh.
I can ask if you want.
Of course.
Thank you for a very informative discussion. So I'm actually, I'm a mother of two kids, 11 and 13, and they've been asked to submit all their homework online. And so they can get graded against their peers in the school as well as other schools as well. So just thinking aloud in terms of data protection for our future generations, I'm quite scared in terms of discrimination and other things that can happen with that data. Are there any things that we're doing to protect our children?
And can I take the comment from the gentleman at the front as well? And we will.
Okay, so my comment comes from a slightly different angle, I suppose, which is we've talked about regulation in open source, and we've talked about copyright and database rights, and we've talked a bit about GDPR. And I'll declare I'm a lawyer, but I'm probably going to come at this from a non-legal perspective. Why don't we rip up the rules? Why don't we stop copyright and database protection for companies? If you publish things on the internet, it is there to be freely used. It is deemed to be open source. Copyright and database rights come from a time where originality and sweat of the brow needed to be protected. Now it's all computer driven. Likewise, on the data side, I think it's very scary that the lady's been asked for her children to submit homework to be compared to other children. But equally, we have all benefited by the advances in technology and the use of data. And I suppose the second question is, has the pendulum swung too far on the political and social field of protecting data and protecting people and not taking into account the economic impact and the economic benefit? Long soliloquy, but I'll stop.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm aware we're coming up towards the end, so I think what we should do is go back along the panel as sort of concluding remarks. And there's two really interesting thoughts there, which feel free to respond to either, neither, or both as you conclude. I think this point on personal protection is interesting. We're speaking a lot about sort of bigger publicly available data, but it's impossible to speak about data without worrying about that personal side. And also, one of the least lawyerly interventions from a lawyer I've heard, sort of throwing up in the whole philosophical question of, shouldn't this all be available once it's online, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it. So, really.
So I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. Amazing people, really interesting thoughts and ideas. I want people to remember data drives innovation. And this is very important. I know that we live in an era where data collection, even open source data collection, is considered by some as a misuse of data. But this is false, and this is very important. A lot of what we see today in the world, the source of a lot of the most innovative products today in the world is based on innovation. Understanding what customers want, understanding how to better serve customers is based on data. And for me as a cybersecurity guy, I'm a CEO of a cybersecurity services company. Most of what we do when we try to protect companies and help companies and devise their strategy and devise their secure architecture is based on data. Without data, you cannot have security. Without data, you cannot have innovation. It's true that it's very important to keep the discussion on about ethics. Very interesting points were made here about ethics and about how we should be fair business-wise to companies who are trying to make money out of their services, which is also okay. Companies should make money, but I think we all have the responsibility to educate the market and educate the world that data drives innovation and also trust and also security, and we should move forward with being ethical and those kind of things.
Fantastic, thank you. Steve?
Also, thank you all from me. When you said that, blew my mind. It's been like a long time since I've been sitting there like, shit, I never thought of that. That's amazing. Oh no, it's terrible. It would be amazing. It would open so much innovation. We would go so fast. To your question, it would be terrifying then, because if there's no guardrails to people just taking data, we don't pay and license and think about these things, then our kids are definitely screwed. So great idea, probably won't work. And on the kids thing, I feel passionate. I've got 3 kids, 3 boys. Same kind of thing, going to the same thing in my school, and I'm a data freak. Right? I love this kind of stuff. The one thing that's missing for me is in a kid's education, this conversation, so they go on social networks, they go on, your parents got the data, no one is sitting down with them and going, this is what it means, when you put your data here, this is how people are going to see it. If you say this, this is how it's going to be viewed, and this is how it's going to be used, and this is how it could disadvantage, and this is how it could advantage. I'd just love to see a course in early education to help the next generation with that.
So I also have 2 kids, two girls, and when my eldest went along to her new school, all of the children were lined up to be fingerprinted. Literally, they're all lined up to be fingerprinted in order to get access to their lunches and library. And my daughter, because I'm her mother,
well-educated data girl.
What can I say? Said that she was not happy for that to happen. She had the right to opt out, and she did opt out of it. So I agree. Like children need to be educated about their rights, and they do have rights over, in particular, data collection that is about them. And there should always be mechanisms for opting out of those kinds of digital tools, I think, in order to let people have their kind of free will. I think that we have to make a clear distinction between the rules that we have around data protection and the rules that we have around the use of personal information and how that might be used in the future from copyright and database right, which are much more around, as you say, sweat of the brow. What do we put stuff in? I would love to see a world where I would love to see a world where there weren't quite the rights that there are automatically over databases, if that led to them being more collection of useful data. It didn't stop data from being collected, and it led to more use of that data. I'm a strong believer in the way that we get value out of data is through it informing the decisions that we make, and the broader those decisions can be, the more people can make decisions off the back of data, the more value we are getting out of it. And that happens when we are able to bring data together in really flexible ways. And so often licensing and rights over data prevent that from happening and prevent the kind of innovation that Menny was talking about. But as always with these, both with copyright and with database right and other kind of IP rights, they're there in order to motivate organisations to collect and to make it. Now, I don't know whether that's necessary for a whole bunch of data that we're talking about right now, which is just generated out of the as a kind of side effect of business, right? I don't know whether those same motivations that need to be in place. I would love the UK to be looking at that critically, particularly now that we don't have to live within the same kind of rules as were set by the EU. Sorry, I could rant about this for ages. I'm going to shut up. Thank you very much.
I think really interesting questions. I think on the personal data point, the good news is that there is some regulation and there is a recognition. I think it's very challenging when it's children. For adults, they can opt in or opt out. And what amazes me is how few people seem to care about keeping their own data private. Everybody seems to be completely relaxed about ticking the box that says you can use my data. But I don't think children at a young age can make that decision. I hope that the homework collection is really carefully protected from a cybersecurity point of view, because we all see even large companies that are very profitable and can afford good cybersecurity unable to keep control over private data. But I do think there's a good active debate on the private data side. On the public data side, I think there should be more discussion. And on the area where it crosses over between the two, so for example, when an individual goes on Twitter and they're looking to publish their views, but it's private data for them, how exactly do you classify that? I think these are all emerging ideas. We think back a few years and the internet wasn't there, and you had to go to your Encyclopedia Britannica to find information. As things are evolving, it's really important, I think, to discuss these topics and to challenge the assumptions around copyright, for example, and find new ways forward.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Just the only thing that remains for me to do is to thank you all for being such an excellent audience and having so many good questions, and to ask you to just thank the panel in the traditional way. Thank you.